you've got questions, he always has an answer. It's Sean Hannity, this afternoon at 2, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Peter Strzok gone. And not a whole lot of people rallying to Peter Strzok's defense. Wonder why that is. The New York Times being the notable exception. The headline in the New York Times yesterday when the news broke, Peter Strzok, who criticized Trump in tweets and or who criticized Trump in texts, fired.
Yeah, making it sound like it was a retaliation.
Like he was fired just because he was critical of Trump.
Mm. There is a GoFundMe page out for him, though.
Yeah, I understand.
Which is ridiculous.
For his legal bills, why would somebody who was just fired for the venal political sin of criticizing Trump need a lawyer? Oh, maybe because he was fired for reasons that have to do with breaking protocol and professional misconduct. Maybe that has something to do with his legal bills. And this brings sort of back Jim Jordan's exchange with the DOJ Inspector General Michael Horowitz from a few weeks ago about the senior leadership of the FBI. Let's go to the scoreboard here.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Horowitz, James Comey, Director of the FBI, Andy McCabe, Deputy Director, Chief of Staff Jim Rubicki, General Counsel Jim Baker, FBI Counsel Lisa Page, and Deputy Head of Counterintelligence Peter Strzok. These were 6 important people at the FBI. Is that right?
Correct.
And they were the key players on the Clinton investigation and on the Russian investigation, correct?
They were certainly important on both.
Has Mr. Comey been fired?
Yes.
Has Mr. McCabe been fired?
Yes.
Did Mr. McCabe lie under oath, according to your report?
In our view, yes.
Yeah. Is there a criminal referral for Mr. McCabe?
I'm not going to comment on that.
Has Mr. Rubicki left the FBI?
Yes.
Has General Counsel Jim Baker left the FBI?
Yes.
Was he removed from his position prior to leaving the FBI?
I'm not sure of that.
Has Lisa Page left the FBI?
Yes.
Was she reassigned prior to leaving the FBI?
I believe so.
And has Peter Strzok been removed from his position as Deputy Head of Counterintelligence?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Horowitz, you've been in the DOJ for 10 years. You've been Inspector General for 6 years. You're chief of all the Inspector Generals. Have you ever seen anything like this at any other federal agency in your time in the federal government? 6 of the top people fired, demoted, reassigned, or left?
I obviously can't speak broadly to other areas that I haven't known before, but yes, this is.
I've been in this town 11 and a half years. I've never seen anything like this.
For more on this and whether he's ever seen anything like this, he is Ron Hosko, former FBI Assistant Director, President now of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Sure. Good to be with you.
Peter Strzok's termination, a necessary occurrence?
Yeah, I think so. As I look at the kind of the overall calculus that the FBI and other, I think, federal agencies use to apply discipline for misconduct, I think there was plenty of room for termination there. I expected at a minimum demotion and a very severe sentence. In the FBI, that the most severe I've ever heard of, short of termination, is 60 days suspended with no pay. And if sometimes they put demotion on top of that, but you don't see that very often. You tend to see people be fired. Not everybody. Certainly, people are sentenced to lesser things, but this offense was damaged the FBI's reputation. It wasn't just damage to Peter Strzok's reputation. That's ongoing damage. It increases with every presidential tweet. Not that presidential tweets alone should be the basis for punishment, but here Strzok gave the deputy director plenty of cause to do what he did.
Well, and during his hearings, too, he was so snarky. There was no contrition. There was no... Do you think if he would have apologized or even been remorseful for what he did, he might still have his job?
I think there was wiggle room there. And, my sense and, frankly, the sense of those who I talk to that are still in the organization, other retired folks, there wasn't a warm, fuzzy feeling for Peter Strzok after his testimony. It was, combative. I guess you would have expected some of that, but you're right. And I think we we discussed this on a prior episode or prior show. There didn't seem to be a lot of contrition. He seemed to be prepared for battle to defend, in part what was indefensible, and have it out with some of these congressmen that were the inquisitors. But I would have preferred, and I think a lot of other people would have preferred, him having started with an apology to his family, to the workforce, to the American people that felt sincere. And I don't know that anybody came away with that sense, and I don't think that helped him in his cause here.
Yeah, James Gagliano, who FBI for 25 years, writing the Washington Examiner, he refers to Strzok's testimony as a graceless appearance before Congress. He assuaged none of us who had concerns about his judgment and fealty to the Constitution. And so, Peter Strzok's employment situation is all interesting and fine, but I'm more interested in the damage that he did in his professional capacity and whether that is something that should be re-examined, and what steps Christopher Wray and the new senior leadership at the FBI are taking to try to undo the damage and restore some of the credibility that's been lost by the senior leaders that were mentioned by Jim Jordan in his conversation with Horowitz.
Yeah, I agree. Look, there was plenty of P.T. Barnum in these hearings, as there has been with Congress in the last few years. And you'd hope that a senior, experienced FBI agent would not be in that situation, would not play into that. I think he gave them some red meat. They took it. It was unduly contentious, and it started in the wrong place. Maybe it would have taken a different path had he started differently, had he sprinkled in some apologies. But I think Jim Gagliano is right in what he said, his criticisms. As I look at the factors that the FBI uses in its sentencing deliberations for misconduct, the one thing stood out is what's the damage to the reputation of the organization. This was bigger than one person. It's been much bigger than one person. It's one person in a very senior position who had interactions with, impact in two very significant cases. Some would argue that the most significant cases. It will be discussed and debated for years whether there was the right outcome, the right process in the Hillary email investigations. Strzok was part of them both. He was part of them, I think, because of his position, because of the confidence the organization had in him at the time. He totally destroyed that. And in the midst of, thousands of texts related to an adulterous affair he was having. So that part stunk to high heaven as well. And everyone saw it while Strzok continued to try to defend it in some ways. It was a failure by him that impacted the organization in a profound way. And I think that my supposition is that the deputy director, you have to weigh a number of factors. Doesn't tell you how much weight you give each one, but I think that one carried outsized weight and brought about this end.
What do you make of this Friends of Special Agent Peter Strzok, this GoFundMe page that they've set up to help pay for legal costs?
Well, if you look back, Andy McCabe wasn't a favorite of the president either. As Mr. Horowitz noted, Andy was found to have violated, clear policy on giving truthful statements. I read the IG report about Andy's situation. It was a compelling report. I haven't really heard a credible defense to it. Mm-hmm. And he was fired as well by the Attorney General a few months ago. And a GoFundMe page went up, and I thought they collected at least $250,000. It might have been more for his defense. Yeah.
Free money.
There are going to be defenders. There are going to be people who work closely with Andy and probably Pete Strzok and looked beyond the current allegations and said, look, this is a friend, I'm going to contribute. So I don't expect him to get wealthy. I certainly would expect him to try to get his federal pension and retirement benefits, and very likely try to sue to do that. I think that was the path that Andy McCabe was going to go down. Those are valuable benefits, and certainly if you're an employee, and I listen, I don't want to diminish Pete Strzok's reputation. I don't know him personally. His reputation was that he was a solid executive, that he was one of the top guys based on his experience in counterintelligence. He knew a lot about counterintelligence. He was an asset to the government. I think he had prior military service, so I give him credit for all that, and certainly understand why he'd want to claim his federal retirement benefits. However, and it's a big however, he did serious harm to the FBI's reputation. It will be continuing harm, and so there are countervailing considerations here that push the deputy director in this direction.
Yeah, those GoFundMe pages. I mean, that's just anti-Trump money. That's just people that anything
that could well be.
That's all it is. Yeah, I mean, that's what it is. Question for you: across the way at Justice, President tweeting about it. Bruce Orr, another guy, seems to be ethically compromised at minimum with respect to his service as a cutout for Christopher Steele to communicate information back to the FBI after Steele was no longer an FBI asset, number one. Number two, of course, his wife working for Fusion GPS. Gee, that's a little bit of a conflict. Should Bruce Orr be fired at Justice?
I'm going to stick with my usual, which is I want to see the facts, and I think the Inspector General is looking into that. I do know Bruce. I worked some with Bruce when I was assistant director, and had a good working relationship with Bruce when we intersected on issues of mutual concern. However, every year we senior executives and executives across the FBI and DOJ had to fill out ethics disclosures. And it was painful going into the spring every year. You knew that form was coming. Actually, it was a couple of forms. You basically had to disclose every asset, every holding in your name, what your wife did for a living, where your resources were. There's a reason for that. There's reporting that Bruce failed to do that, failed to tell his superiors as this bubbled up that there was that his wife had this work relationship. And that is deeply troubling because I know so many of us took those reports seriously. There's a purpose for that, and Bruce knew that purpose. And so if he failed to do that intentionally, that is certainly a fireable offense. It is deeply troubling by a senior DOJ official. And if he violated those prescriptions willfully, absolutely he should be fired.
I want to get to your take on an unrelated matter. Over the weekend, you saw these Antifa thugs in Charlottesville and D.C., some violence, certainly bad behavior. Bad behavior is necessarily criminal. Ignorant chanting, not criminal. But when you, as a former FBI assistant director, when you look at Antifa and you've seen what they did over the weekend and what they've done in places like Portland and elsewhere, does this organization begin to draw the attention of federal law enforcement like the FBI?
Very much so. Yeah, there's the FBI guidelines really give a wide berth to First Amendment rights. And so the organization, because of sins in the past, think back to civil rights era, Martin Luther King, someone exercising their First Amendment freedoms, whether it's religious or speech or otherwise, do not give rise to an FBI investigation unless. And here you have what looks like conspiracy to foment violence, to engage in unlawful acts, to include property destruction. We saw some missiles launched, apart from the epithets at police, which I think are completely reprehensible. I know that there's this alchemy between Antifa and Black Lives Matter is there. Other groups who claim to reject hate but spew it. Mm-hmm. And so it seemed like most of the violence, the original protesters were few in number and surrounded by a phalanx of law enforcement so that they could spew their hate as well. But the large numbers came from Antifa and the other groups, Black Lives Matter most prominently, and they were the ones really spewing the hate, much of it towards police, some of it toward the primary protesters. I think it's offensive, and I think the FBI is looking at groups like that who are involved in violent acts. You know, when a line is crossed, fomenting violence, looking to cause a riot, looking to do property damage and other forms of destruction, there's a purpose for the FBI and for law enforcement, and I'm sure they're weighing their options. But I mean, they certainly want to give them wide berth to express their views. You can do that freely, but these guys are looking to cross the line. When you see how they come prepared for battle, you can see the black masks. They're covering their faces for a purpose, and it's not just so that, well, part of it is so they aren't captured on camera, because of the, you know, makes it more difficult, just like bank robbers used to. Makes it more difficult to build the case and say that's the person when they have a mask on, when they have a hat on, when they're covering their features. There's a purpose for that, and they understand that. These are some are smart people. They understand how to get away with it.
Right. But
so I hope the FBI does focus on them and does what they do very well to interdict and prevent violence.
He is Ron Hosko, former FBI Assistant Director, now the President for the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Sure thing. Have a great day.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.